not letting that rising emotion drive our behavior. And especially with somebody so intimate and so special and so careful, a relationship so fragile as our marriage, and somebody so important as our spouse. I think that we need to reinstill that importance and that awe and that admiration that this is the person who God allowed me to join with. So today I wanted to talk about charity in marriage. How oftentimes the person that's the most intimate and closest with us can sometimes get the worst version of ourselves. And I don't mean like a messy version where we go through seasons that are difficult and we need our spouse's support, but I mean in seasons where we stop valuing our spouse's opinion, where we stop considering them, where we stop being charitable because it's become too difficult to maintain and express the fruits of the Spirit in such a close and intimate relationship. It's so easy to let go of those things that God calls us to be, especially in a relationship as close as marriage. When you're around someone 24/7 and you're having to die to yourself and consider that person and be slow to anger and slow to respond and quick to listen and to value their perspective. And so I just wanted to kind of explore that concept today because I thought it was a little bit interesting as my husband and I studied briefly this chapter, and I believe James 1, 19 through 21, where it says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And as I was thinking about this, I said, wow, God calls us to be quick in one thing, and that one thing is consideration. That one thing is charity. That one thing is listening. Be quick to listen. And he says, be slow to speak and slow to anger. And what better place to exercise this concept other than marriage, right? In a space where you want to be reactive, in a space where you're not always going to be in the best state of yourself, where kids can drive you crazy, right? And you're on your last brain cell, or where work can be stressful, and then you have to deal with the regular routine of the day, where you're not just by yourself, right, and dealing with your emotions, but you're always around somebody. And it can be a very beautiful thing. And I think it is a very beautiful thing. But I think sometimes that it's easy for that slow to speak and that slow to anger. It's easy for that to get lost in translation sometimes when we're in heightened moments and met with having to consider our spouse. I was reading this book called Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas, I believe. And he talks about how marriage is a place where you show and try to really tap into being holy, into being set apart, where marriage is a place to test yourself in ways that you wouldn't think you would have to outside of this context, where that quick to listen and that slow may become even more difficult. And I wanted to share a passage in this book briefly where Gary Thomas, and I'm just reading really briefly, he talked about it's on page 87 of Sacred Marriage. He talked about it finally dawned on me one day that if it takes Lisa just 7 seconds to fill an ice cube tray, that's all it takes me as well. Was I really so selfish that I was willing to let 7 seconds worth of inconvenience become a serious issue in my marriage? Was the capacity to show charity really that limited? And that is the question right there. And I believe that you guys can kind of put together the pieces of, he was mad about her not doing this act and realize that he can do it himself and save himself a fight and a disagreement every time for something that takes so little of time to do. But that question at the end, was my capacity to show charity really that limited? And really analyzing your space with your spouse, right? Like, if I'm easily annoyed, if I'm easily angered, if I'm always firing off and saying things, what does that show about my capacity for loving my spouse, for being charitable to my spouse, right? Which is an interchangeable word often in the Bible, love and charity, and valuing their perspective and hearing them, even if we don't believe that it is right. How often do we consider them, right? Even if we don't believe that, hey, you could just fill the ice cube tray, just do it, just do it. It takes a couple seconds, just do it. It's not right. Even if we feel angry by that, why is it so hard for us to show charity? And I think that speaks also to our human nature and how God puts our human nature so close in our face in marriage sometimes, right? It's like, wow, we are really selfish and we have this selfish anger, right? That's what it even talks about in that James passage, that James 1:19-21, that human anger does not produce righteous results, is somewhere in that mix, I believe. And human anger is that selfish anger, right? Like you didn't do what I wanted you to do, or you didn't say it the way I wanted you to say it. And now I'm angry. Now I'm irritated. That selfish reaction in response to our spouse often becomes very easy when we do not connect to our word and when we do not consider them. And we often forget that our spouse is supposed to be the most considered person in our life, in our physical life, right? Like God and then our spouse, right? And so if we're treating others better, if we can find the words and the patience with other people outside of our marriage, then it's important that we pray and we ask God, help me to find the patience and the words to navigate situations that are difficult with my spouse. And right, it's not always going to be difficult. Hopefully, it's not. Hopefully, you have a good ratio of disagreement and fun. Right. Hopefully, there's a good ratio in there. If you're Gottman fans and you know that there's a healthy little ratio in there, but the reality is that as I've been married for the little bit of time that I have been, and there's always going to be difficulties and different things. I think that is such an interesting passage to ponder and to ask God, if I am dealing with these emotions of anger and frustration and bitterness, and I'm again not exercising that quick to listen and that slow to react and that slow to anger, what in me is making me slow to listen? I'm irritable. I feel like I know them. I've been here before. I've heard it before. I don't even want to hear their perspective because it's stupid, right? But I'm just saying, when you get into that space of slow to listen, we're making assumptions of our spouse. The comfortability often breeds contempt and we don't consider them anymore, right? And that becomes that slow to listen. Like, oh, I don't even want to hear it. Why am I irritated with my wife's vulnerability? Why am I irritated with my husband's resolutions? Why am I irritated with whatever it may be, fill in the blank? But what in me is making me irritable is a great question. So, as I was reading through these different passages and trying to understand this concept, right, of the quick, slow, slow, there are some self checks that we can do to recognize in ourself the state that we are in so that we can respond with love, with charity, with consideration to our spouses. So, some self checks are: first question, and I had my husband send me a picture of my Bible. So, if I'm looking down, that is what I'm looking at, some notes, and it is James 1:19-21. But first question to ask yourself when you're feeling irritable, you're feeling angry, you're feeling like you want to be quick to speak, quick to anger, and slow to listen is: am I trying to prove or connect? This is such an important question because what your intentions are totally matters. And it almost gives yourself, like I said, that in your face moment with Jesus of what is inside of me that needs to be corrected or addressed right now. Because if I'm trying to prove, then it's probably not going to be productive. Harsh startups probably won't lead to great endings. And there's so much that can go wrong with me coming in this hot and not being able to hear what my spouse has to say. So proving often will not get us anywhere. And I have to ask myself that sometimes, like, yeah, I am trying to prove. I am trying to say, see, look, this is why. And that is not helpful in any conversation. So we need to check ourselves and ask ourselves that question of what's the importance here, right? It's us against the problem. It's us against the irritation, not me against them. So oftentimes asking yourself that question can really get yourself to re-regulate and to say, you know what, I'm not in the right state right now to have this conversation. And let me be quick to listen. Let me be slow to respond. And let me be slow to anger. And even if I am angry, step away in communication and in love and be honest with myself and get some help from God. And the next question is, can I say this without my body reacting? If I say this, are my teeth clenched? Are my fists clenched? Are my eyes wide and my heart is pounding? That might not be a productive place to come have a conversation in, right? Because my body's reacting and I'm trying to prove if it's coupled with that. But especially if your body is reacting, that may be an indication of, wow, I'm really not in a state right now and I don't want to let my emotions drive the ship, is what my mom always used to say. And it's just that factor of not letting that rising emotion drive our behavior. And especially with somebody so intimate and so special and so careful, a relationship so fragile as our marriage, and somebody so important as our spouse. I think that we need to reinstill that importance and that awe and that admiration that this is the person who God allowed me to join with, hopefully. And I am aware there's many nuance and many situations, and safety is important. So if this is not applicable to you, don't feel guilty. This is not the video for you. But in a marriage where you deal with just little disagreements and cycles of constantly, not being on the same page, and whatever that cycle kind of looks like of lack of communication and in disagreement and those things that are not, they are very, very dangerous, but not physically dangerous. Seek help if you're in a physically dangerous situation. And the last question to ask yourself is, do I feel safe to hear a response that I don't like? Sometimes other people's perspectives and opinions can frustrate us. And that may just be us all around as a person. Like maybe we need help in every area um, in that specific category rather than just our spouse. Maybe even hearing our neighbor's opinion may stir us up and make us irate. But I'm here to let you know that your opinion and your perspective is not the only important one. It is not the only true and valid one. And there are many ways that people come to conclusions and opinions and perspectives that deals to systemically with being raised in certain environments and their family environment and their upbringing and all of these things that contribute to different perspectives and opinions. And you are not the only one with the right perspective. So if we're not feeling safe to hear a response or a perspective or an opinion that we do not want, that may be an indication again to communicate in love and step away and ask God for help to re-regulate and let him hold that mirror in your face to say, what is in me that cannot respond with any of the fruits of the Spirit right now? What is in me that cannot consider this person that I am integrated with, that I am blended in one space, in one spiritual space with? What is inside of me that doesn't want to be charitable and considerate towards my spouse, towards my wife, towards my husband, right? Um, and these, I think, are great questions to ask ourselves, even myself, when I'm feeling tense, when I'm feeling like I want to say something, I have to check, where is this coming from? What space is this coming from? Is it going to be productive? Is this more of a reaction, or is this a response? So this scripture is not emotional suppression at all. It's slowing it down. God did not say be quick to listen and do not anger and do not get mad. He said be slow to anger and slow to respond. And still there's that quick to listen, right? But this is not emotional suppression or lying to yourself or shoving things down. This is slowing it down, looking at where you are, really analyzing those emotions, especially again in such an intimate relationship as your marriage, and being able to recognize where you're at and to treat your spouse with love and with kindness and with charitability. Sometimes we think that, again, just reiterating, those close and intimate relationships can become taken for granted so easily. And it's so important to remember, this is who I love. This is my beloved. And I cherish them even when it's difficult. I love them even when it's hard. And God says, husbands, love your wives. That doesn't just mean when it's easy, right? That's in the difficult times. Wives, respect your husbands, right? And that's not just when it's easy. How great would it be? I think there's even a verse in the Bible, but how great would it be to just exercise these things when it's easy, right? But marriage is that holy place, that intimate place where you're faced in front of that mirror so closely. And God is saying, exercise these fruits of the Spirit, even when it's difficult. Analyze yourself, check yourself, treat your spouse with love, be charitable, consider them always. All of the things that God tells us to be to people in our circle and around us and in the world, right? All of these things he tells us to be in the world, loving and charitable, are amplified in a marriage. And let's not lose sight of that. We should not be treating everyone else better than the people in our home and our spouses. We need to exercise those fruits even more and even more often in a marriage because we're around them even more and even more often. It's easy to put on a smile on Sunday, but let's exercise these fruits Monday through Sunday and again and again and again, in our most intimate spaces, and allow God to see our hearts and allow God to work on our hearts. I think even a question that my husband and I kind of went over when briefly studying this was the slow to anger part and the slow to speak. And I wanted to kind of shed light on that also, is the what is slow to speak, right? Like, do I wait until they're done? Do I walk away? Like, do I ignore until I'm ready? What is the slow to speak? And I wanted to shed light on, slow to speak is not stonewalling. It's not ignoring. It's not shutting down, right? We have to push through and do things that we don't like sometimes. And so that slow to speak is even communicating in that frustration and communicating space, right? I really want to talk about this, but this is really hard for me right now. I need a couple hours. Maybe I need a day. Whatever the time is in pertaining to the injury, like, okay, if the injury is like the ice cream was left out or something, like, okay, maybe I need an hour or so and let's revisit this because I'm not responding in a place of love right now. And I don't want to do that to you. So let's revisit this in an hour. If the injury is something more extreme, like maybe how to deal with the kids or something like that, like, this topic is really hard for me. I really want to pray about this and revisit this on Wednesday, on Tuesday, whatever it is, right? I'm not giving a black and white timeline for anybody's specific situation, but I do want to say that slow to speak is still responding with your communication needs in love. And it's hard. But you're not having the whole conversation about the injury that can potentially be detrimental, right? Can potentially be not a great space and cause more injury, but you are just communicating space. If you need to be slow to speak, right, and you need time, communicate that. And don't let the slow to speak turn into stonewalling or isolation. And lastly, for the slow to wrath, right, is like, well, I'm angry and this is justified and I want to communicate my feelings. I want to communicate this injury. I want to tell them how I feel. I am not happy. I want to express that. Something is bothering me. I want to express that. And that is fine. And again, the verse is not about emotional suppression in our marriage and just letting things be swept under the rug to create a bigger monster, right? It's about slowing it down. So those questions, those self checks, and this slow to anger is important. those self checks of, am I trying to prove or connect? Is my body being really reactive? And am I in a safe space to hear a response I don't want to hear? Right? Like, yes, I'm offended, but let me do a self check to see if I am just responding out of anger right now. If my emotions need to be processed and sifted a bit more before having this conversation. Your marriage is important. Your marriage is sacred. Your marriage is supposed to be the space where you consider your person, consider your spouse, and don't take that for granted. Don't get lackadaisical in the way that you communicate and consider your spouse. That is who you are married to. That is who you chose and who God intended on you to be with. And again, if this is not applicable to you, let it fly, right? There's so much nuance. There's so many different situations. Not everybody's circumstance is the same. But in a marriage where there are things that are fixable and safe, then I hope this was helpful for you. So have a good one and leave any questions or comments and expound the conversation down below. I am so open to people's views, and I think it's important to have conversations about things that we're curious about. So let's continue the conversation down below.